When an empire's invasion met a mechanic's bad day, the Zetharian Empire was the most dominant force in the galaxy. For centuries, they had conquered planets, subjugated civilizations, and expanded their dominion across the stars with an efficiency that bordered on terrifying. Their fleets numbered in the tens of thousands, their soldiers were genetically enhanced warriors, and their technology was so advanced that lesser species barely understood how it worked. When they set their sights on Earth, they did not hesitate. Their analysts, high-ranking warlords, and scholars all reached the same conclusion. Humanity was an easy target. Earth was primitive by galactic standards, still relying on combustion engines, struggling with nuclear fusion, and completely unaware of the true physics of faster-than-light travel. By the Empire's calculations, the invasion would last less than a day. They were wrong. Very, very wrong. The Empire arrives. The Zetharian Armada arrived in Earth's orbit like a god descending upon ants. 15,000 warships, each the size of a city, hovered above the planet, blotting out the sun in some regions. Their massive planetary suppression cannons charged with an eerie blue glow, ready to strike down any resistance before it could even begin. The Supreme Commander, Zetharian, stood aboard the bridge of the flagship, gazing down at the planet below with cold amusement. "This world will belong to us before sundown," he declared, his deep voice echoing across the command deck. The invasion began with precision and overwhelming force. Earth's satellites, instantly disabled. Global communication networks, scrambled beyond recovery. Missile defense systems, rendered useless. The first wave of ground forces, 2 million heavily armed shock troopers, descended into Earth's major cities, ready to crush any human resistance. The Zetharians had conquered 127 planets before this one. They expected Earth to surrender immediately. Instead, they received a message on every available frequency. Incoming transmission from Earth. A holographic screen flickered to life on the command deck, revealing a human male in a grease-stained jumpsuit, sitting in what appeared to be a cluttered garage, filled with spare parts, half-empty coffee cups, and jury-rigged machinery. The man took a slow sip from his coffee mug, sighed, and finally spoke. "So, who do I talk to about this mess?" The mechanic who didn't have time for this. Meet Nathan Briggs. Age, 37. Occupation, mechanic and electrical engineer. Mood, very, very annoyed. Nathan had already been having a terrible day before the Zetharian fleet arrived. That morning, he had spilled coffee all over his workstation. His boss had rejected his request for a day off. His car had broken down for the 3rd time that week. And now, aliens were invading Earth. Nathan pinched the bridge of his nose as he listened to the incoming warnings on his outdated radio scanner. Governments were panicking, the military was scrambling, and people were losing their minds. He, however, was just tired. "This is the last thing I needed today," he muttered, grabbing his toolbox. While the rest of the world braced for planetary annihilation, Nathan did what he always did. He got to work. First contact, with a guy who was just done with it. Back on the Zetharian flagship, Supreme Commander Zetharian was furious. This human was not a military leader, not a politician, not a scientist, just a mechanic. And he wasn't even afraid. "You dare speak to me in this manner?" Zetharian thundered, his voice sending chills through his officers. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Listen, buddy, I don't know who you are, but I assume you're the one responsible for making today even worse than it already was." The Supreme Commander narrowed his eyes. "I am Supreme Commander Zetharian of the Zetharian Empire, and you are nothing but a primitive inhabitant of this insignificant world. You will surrender immediately." Nathan took another sip of coffee. "Yeah, see, that's gonna be a problem." Zetharian bristled. "Do you not understand? We have thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, and technology that your species cannot even comprehend." Nathan sighed, set his coffee down, and stood up. Yeah. Well, you park your fleet directly over my city, and now my Wi-Fi's acting up. So let's talk about who's really suffering here. Silence. One of the Zetharian officers snorted involuntarily before immediately freezing in terror. Zetharian's fist clenched. You have 5 minutes to surrender before we reduce your cities to rubble. Nathan cracked his knuckles and grabbed his toolbox. Nah. You've got 5 minutes before I figure out how to break your fancy tech with a screwdriver and some duct tape. The Supreme Commander laughed in disbelief. This is not a negotiation, human. Nathan grinned. Good. I hate negotiating. Now, tell me where your main power grid is. The one-man sabotage operation. Nathan didn't wait for permission. Within minutes, he had hacked into their communication grid, slipped past security protocols, and gained remote access to a portion of their ship's internal systems, using nothing but a modified laptop and a stolen frequency from an old satellite. His first move. He disabled their air conditioning. Across the Zetharian fleet, thousands of soldiers suddenly found themselves sweating under their armor, their highly regulated environment systems overheating. Nathan laughed to himself. Step 1. Make them uncomfortable. Step 2. Make them regret everything. The first signs of panic. On the Zetharian flagship, Zetharian stiffened as warning alarms began blaring. Sir, a technician cried. We're experiencing power fluctuations across multiple sectors of the fleet. Someone is. Nathan's voice suddenly echoed through the ship's intercom. Hey, quick question. What happens if I reverse the polarity on your main power core? Zetharian's blood ran cold. Find him, he snarled. Now. But it was already too late. Nathan had found their weakness, and he was just getting started. When an empire realized they had made a huge mistake, the beginning of chaos. Supreme Commander Zetharian had seen countless battles in his lifetime. He had crushed rebellions, obliterated fleets, and wiped civilizations from existence. But never in his long military career had he encountered something like this. A single human, not a general, not a scientist, not a warrior, just a mechanic, had somehow breached the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. And he wasn't negotiating. He wasn't surrendering. He was breaking things. A lot of things. Zetharian's command deck was in chaos. Sir, we are detecting multiple power surges across the fleet. Several weapon systems are offline. Shield integrity is fluctuating, and half the security doors are opening and closing at random. The Supreme Commander's mandibles twitched in fury. How? He demanded. How is this even possible? One of his senior engineers, a Zetharian named Crickstall, hesitated before speaking. My lord, it appears that the human has gained access to our system's primary network. Zetharian froze. Then he leaned forward slowly, his voice low and dangerous. How? The engineer gulped. Well, it appears our main security firewall was. What? Zetharian snarled. Crickstall shuffled his feet uncomfortably. It was never designed to handle human hacking techniques. Silence. A younger officer blinked. What does that mean? Crickstall sighed and looked directly at his commander. My lord, the human brute forced his way into our system by exploiting an oversight in our encryption protocols. He used something called a password reset request. Dead silence. Every officer turned to look at Crickstall in horror. The Supreme Commander twitched violently. Are you telling me, he said slowly, that this human hacked into our fleet with a forgotten password request? Crickstall winced. Well, technically, he answered the security question first. Zetharian rubbed his temples. What was the security question? Crickstall's voice was barely a whisper. Mother's maiden name. A long pause. Then, from somewhere on the bridge, a low, strangled noise escaped one of the officers. A laugh. Someone actually laughed. Zetharian's head snapped up. Who laughed? Everyone immediately shut up. Meanwhile, on the human side of things, Nathan Briggs had expected the Zetharians to have some kind of advanced cybersecurity. Maybe AI defenses, maybe quantum encryption, maybe firewalls that required entire supercomputers to crack. Instead, he found a login page with a forgotten password option. And the security question: what is your mother's maiden name? Nathan had stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds, wondering if this was some kind of trap. Then, purely as a joke, he typed Zorvex, a random guess. And it worked. Nathan had sat back in his chair, blinking. There's no way, he muttered. But sure enough, the system had reset itself, and now he had full administrator access to the Zetharian flagship's internal controls. For about 2 seconds, he considered being responsible. Then he grinned and started pressing buttons. The unfolding disaster. Back on the flagship, things were getting worse. Nathan's first order of business: he shut off all gravity control systems. Throughout the entire 15,000-ship fleet, Zetharian soldiers suddenly floated off the ground, crashing into walls, ceilings, and equipment. Then, just as they started to adjust, he turned the gravity back on. Hard. Aliens crashed to the ground with a series of loud thuds, weapons clattering as the entire fleet momentarily descended into absolute confusion. The Empire's greatest engineers were panicking. Krixtal was losing his mind. The gravity failure was bad enough. But then, the internal climate controls were set to 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The entire fleet's alarm systems began blaring Earth music, specifically a song titled Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. The ship's weapon systems were now set to aim at random, causing warships to point their guns at each other. The entire fleet's toilet systems flushed simultaneously. This is impossible. Krixtal stammered, staring at his failing systems. Zetharian, meanwhile, was having a nervous breakdown. How is one human doing all of defies? Krixtal swallowed. My lord, it's worse than that. Zetharian turned, veins throbbing. Worse. The engineer nodded weakly. We just received a transmission from the human. Zetharian froze. Put it through. The main holoscreen flickered to life. There, sitting comfortably in a chair, drinking coffee and wearing sunglasses indoors, was Nathan Briggs. He smiled. Sup, fellas. The human negotiation tactics. Nathan leaned back in his chair, looking incredibly casual. So, funny story. Turns out your security sucks. Like, really bad. Zetharian was speechless. Nathan took another sip of coffee. Now, don't take this the wrong way, but, I own your fleet now. So here's what's gonna happen. He held up a finger. 1. You're gonna stop this invasion immediately. He held up another finger. 2. You're gonna take your fancy ships and go home. A third finger. And 3. You're gonna send me one of those Zetharian plasma welders, because I hear they're fantastic, and I want to see if they work better than my old one. Silence. Zetharian was shaking with barely contained rage. Nathan smiled. Oh, and one more thing. If you don't listen to me. He casually held up a small device, something he had just rewired. This is your fleet's main reactor override. I could press this button and turn every single ship here into fireworks. He gave them a cheerful wave. Your call, boys. The Zetharian fleet, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was now at the mercy of a very sarcastic, very annoyed human mechanic. And as Supreme Commander Zetharian stood there, watching his empire crumble before his eyes, one thought screamed in his mind. We should have picked another planet. When a mechanic became the most dangerous man in the galaxy. The Empire's worst nightmare. The Zetharian Empire had spent centuries perfecting war. They had crushed rebellions, burned planets, and eradicated entire civilizations that dared to oppose them. They had never lost a war. Until now. And the worst part, they weren't being defeated by an advanced military force. Not by a rival empire. Not even by some legendary warrior race. No. The most feared fleet in the galaxy was being systematically humiliated by a human mechanic who hadn't even left his workshop. Supreme Commander Zetharian stood on the bridge of his flagship, clenching his fists so tightly his claws dug into his own palms. His fleet was in chaos. Gravity was fluctuating uncontrollably. Alarm systems blared Earth music on loop. The ship's AI had been reprogrammed to speak in sarcastic human phrases. And worst of all, the entire Zetharian invasion force was now effectively held hostage by a single human, Nathan Briggs, a 37-year-old mechanic from Earth who had somehow hijacked an entire armada using nothing but a laptop, Wi-Fi, and a ridiculous amount of spite. A meeting of desperation. Zetharian turned toward his chief engineers, fleet commanders, and tactical officers, the finest minds in the Empire. Their expressions were grim. "We need to retake control of our systems immediately," Zetharian growled. "Give me solutions." The room was silent. Then, finally, one of the lead engineers, Krixtal, hesitantly stepped forward. "My lord, the human has completely overridden our security protocols. We cannot regain access to our own systems." Zetharian's mandibles twitched violently. "Then create a new access point." Krixtal hesitated. "That is also impossible." Zetharian's eye twitched. "Explain." Krixtal swallowed nervously. "Well, my lord, the human has, set up additional security measures of his own." "What kind of security measures?" Krixtal sighed. "He has locked the entire fleet behind. A two-step verification process." A long pause. "What?" "A two-step verification process," Krixtal repeated, shifting uncomfortably. "In order to regain control, we need access to his personal device, and also to input a security code that he has set up." Zetharian took a deep breath. "What is the security code?" Krixtal's mandibles twitched. "We don't know, my lord. Every time we try to guess, the system tells us we have 3 more attempts before the fleet self-destructs." Silence. Then Zetharian turned toward his chief of intelligence. "Tell me you at least found out more about this human." The intelligence officer nodded quickly, pulling up a holographic file. "Yes, Supreme Commander. His name is Nathan Briggs." "He is." The officer hesitated, clearing his throat awkwardly. "A mechanic." Zetharian's eye twitched harder. "I know that already." "Right, of course, my lord. Apologies." The officer scrolled down his report, clearing his throat again. "It appears that Nathan Briggs has a history of solving extremely complex engineering problems using methods that our scientists describe as wildly irresponsible and borderline magic." Zetharian narrowed his eyes. "Elaborate." The intelligence officer nodded quickly. "According to our research, Nathan Briggs once repaired an entire city's power grid using nothing but aluminum foil and a car battery." A low murmur went through the room. "He also successfully rerouted an exploding nuclear reactor by..." The officer hesitated, kicking it really hard. Silence. Even Zetharian was speechless. The officer scrolled further. "Oh, and 2 years ago, he prevented a major industrial explosion by..." He squinted at the report, attaching a paperclip to a superconductor and praying really hard. At this, Krixtal nearly collapsed. "My lord," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "We are dealing with a man who treats physics as a mild suggestion." Zetharian felt his own confidence begin to shake. "Are you saying that he's some kind of genius?" "No, my lord," the intelligence officer said gravely. "I am saying that he is an absolute lunatic. And worse, he has access to our fleet." Meanwhile, Nathan Briggs was having fun. Nathan had never had this much power before. Sure, He'd fixed cars, power plants, and the occasional hacked vending machine. But now he was in control of an entire alien fleet, and nobody could stop him. "All right," he muttered to himself, scrolling through the ship's internal control systems. "Let's see what else I can mess with." He disabled all security doors, causing thousands of Zetharian soldiers to spill into hallways like confused cattle. He randomly altered the ship's artificial gravity, making some decks completely weightless and others 10 times heavier than normal. He reprogrammed the fleet's main AI, replacing its standard security protocols with Earth sarcasm. When one of the Zetharian engineers tried to regain access, the AI responded, "I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that." Nathan laughed. This was the most fun he'd had in years. The final warning. Back on the bridge, Zetharian was out of options. His fleet was collapsing into chaos, and his officers were on the verge of rebellion. He had no choice. He activated the emergency communications channel and sent a direct transmission to Nathan. The screen flickered to life, revealing Nathan, who was now kicked back in his chair, sipping coffee and wearing a bathrobe. "Yo." Zetharian took a deep breath. "Human, what do you want?" Nathan grinned. "Now we're talking. All right, here's the deal, buddy. You're gonna take your fancy little armada, turn around, and leave Earth alone. Forever." Zetharian hesitated. "And if we refuse?" Nathan leaned forward. "Then I'm going to teach your fleet how to self-destruct from the inside out. And trust me, I've done it before." The Supreme Commander considered his options. After a long, painful silence, he gritted his teeth, and then, with every ounce of humiliation, he said the words that would be recorded in Zetharian history for generations. "We surrender." When humanity became a galactic superpower. The aftermath of the most embarrassing defeat in galactic history. For the first time in recorded Zetharian history, an invasion force had surrendered. Not to a military powerhouse, not to a superior species, not to an advanced civilization, but to Nathan Briggs, a human mechanic, engineer, and resident caffeine addict, who had spent most of the war sitting in a garage hacking into the enemy fleet using questionable Wi-Fi and sheer audacity. The entire Zetharian armada, once the most feared force in the galaxy, had limped back to their homeworld without firing a single shot. To say that Supreme Commander Zetharian was humiliated would be an understatement. But as his battered fleet entered Zetharian space, he realized something far worse. The galaxy had witnessed everything. Every major species, every rival empire, every neutral world, every trading guild, had seen their so-called unstoppable army reduced to a laughingstock. And the worst part, word was spreading. Fast. The Galactic Council convenes in panic. The Galactic Council, a coalition of the most powerful civilizations in the known universe, gathered in an emergency session the moment the Zetharians returned. The chamber was a flurry of chaos, filled with panicked voices, shouting delegates, and holographic reports filled with disaster-level analysis of the event. At the head of the room sat High Chancellor Venrak, leader of the Galactic Council, a reptilian alien with 4 beady eyes, sharp fangs, and a migraine forming behind all of them. "This cannot be happening," Venrak hissed, his clawed fingers digging into the table. "The Zetharian Empire has never lost a war, and now you tell me they surrendered to a single human." Supreme Commander Zetharian, still humiliated, stood stiffly in the middle of the room. He had spent his entire life as a feared military leader. Now he was a joke. He took a slow breath before answering. "Not just a human, High Chancellor. The mechanic." The room fell silent. And then, in the farthest corner of the chamber, someone laughed. Not a normal laugh. A deep, wheezing, uncontrollable fit of absolute hysteria. The entire council turned toward Ambassador Grichtal of the Valeri Trade Consortium, a usually composed, sophisticated diplomat. But right now, he was crying from laughter. A mechanic, He gasped between fits of laughter. They didn't even send a soldier. Zetharian ground his teeth. He was unreasonably effective. Unreasonably effective. Gricktal howled. The man hijacked your entire fleet, Zetharian. Your unstoppable empire was taken down by a guy who probably spends his weekends fixing broken refrigerators. Zetharian stayed silent. Because he couldn't argue. The room erupted into chaos again. "This changes everything," one of the council members whispered. And they were right. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted. Forever. Earth's reaction. Confusion, memes, and opportunism. Back on Earth, humanity was only just realizing what had happened. News broadcasts had barely kept up with the chaos. Headlines flooded the internet. Aliens tried to invade. A mechanic stopped them. The Zetharians surrendered. We weren't even trying. Nathan Briggs. The man, the myth, the mechanic. Galactic superpowers fear Earth. We just found out about them last week. Meanwhile, Nathan himself. He had slept through half of it. By the time journalists reached his garage, he was still in his bathrobe, drinking coffee, and squinting at the sudden swarm of news cameras outside his house. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, blinking. "Mr. Briggs, how does it feel to be the most powerful man in the galaxy?" I feel pretty normal, to be honest. Are you aware that alien civilizations now consider Earth a military threat because of you?" Nathan paused mid-sip. "Wait, what?" That was how Earth officially entered the galactic stage. Not through diplomacy. Not through war. But because one guy got annoyed and hacked an alien fleet. The offers start pouring in. Within weeks, every major galactic civilization was sending envoys to Earth. Some wanted alliances. Some wanted trade deals. Some just wanted to know how the hell humanity even functioned. Nathan, meanwhile, was trying to process it all. "Okay, let me get this straight," he said, rubbing his temples. "The Valeri Trade Consortium wants to give me an entire planet as a reward for embarrassing the Zetharians." The government official briefing him nodded. "Correct. And the Scarvar Dominion wants to make me a, what was it? Supreme Tactician of Intergalactic Warfare." Nathan stared. "I fix cars. They are aware." Nathan took a deep breath. "Okay. And the Zetharians?" The official hesitated. "They have issued an official apology for the invasion attempt and are offering you a battleship." Nathan blinked. "Like a real battleship?" "Yes." "With guns?" "Yes." Nathan grinned. "Sweet. The birth of the Terran Republic." Humanity wasn't just joining the galactic community. They were dominating it. Within a year, Earth had formed the Terran Republic, an official government representing humanity in interstellar affairs. And at the head of it all, Nathan Briggs. "How the hell did I end up here?" Nathan muttered as he stood in front of a crowd of millions, about to deliver his first speech as the leader of an interstellar superpower. The cameras rolled. Nathan took a deep breath, stepped forward, and spoke the words that would define Earth's entrance into galactic history. "All right. So, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But since we're here, let's make it interesting." The crowd erupted. And thus began the age of humanity in the stars.